Historically, Boston Sprinter has, in my opinion, been one of the better US routes in train sim world, especially when compared to the disastrous New York to Trenton. I originally reviewed the Boston route in April 2023, but I'm no longer happy with that old review, so I thought I would remake it. I've had the idea to do so since November 2023, but for various reasons, it's taken a rather long time to come to fruition. Originally released in August 2021, this add-on now costs $43.59 NZD for the version compatible with TSW5, when it used to only cost $37. Considering the relatively small size of this route, and the limited service variation, I don't think it's worth that full price, and you'd be better off picking it up in a sale if you want to try it out for yourself. So, what do you actually get with Boston Sprinter? Well, not a whole lot, to be honest. In terms of route coverage, you get the 43 miles, or 69.2 kilometers of track from Boston South Station, in Massachusetts, down to Providence, Rhode Island. But wait, there's more! As Dovetail also provided the 4-mile-long branch line from Canton Junction to Stoughton. Disappointingly, that's the only branch you get on this route. This section of the Northeast Corridor is somewhat unusual, as the electrification north of New Haven, Connecticut wasn't finished until 2000. As a result, the overhead catenary north of New Haven looks an awful lot more modern than the old Pennsylvania Railroad catenary south of New York City. At some point in 2023, although I can't remember exactly when, the Boston to Providence route was upgraded with TOD4 lighting, volumetric fog, and other improvements, although the scenery is still underwhelming in multiple places, as we'll see later. Both Amtrak and MBTA services are represented on this route, which only includes the Siemens ACS64 electric locomotive, with Amfleet coaches, and the MPI F40PH-3C diesel locomotive, with a criminally small selection of MBTA coaches. Specifically, you only get the BTC3 coach and a CTC3 cab car, built by Messerschmitt Bölkow Blohm, which makes for an unrealistic rail scene in-game. MBTA often uses an inconsistent mix of single and double-decker coaches for their trains in real life, and I've never liked seeing every single MBTA service in-game looking exactly the same. In Boston Sprinter's case, they all consist of one F40PH-3C locomotive, 4 BTC3 coaches, and one CTC3 cab car, with the locomotive always at the southern end, just like what they did on Caltrain. The Siemens ACS64 is one of the most modern electric locomotives in the United States. She's also one of only a handful of American electric locomotives currently running in the USA, especially when compared to how many the country had until as late as the 1960s and 1970s.
The Milwaukee Road.
Amtrak was the launch customer for this design, of which 70 examples were built for them between 2012 and 2016. The first ACS64 entered service in 2014, and now the class has completely replaced the older AEM7 and HHP8 locomotives on NEC services. In TSW, you get the ACS64 in bog-standard Phase 5 colours, as well as the unique Phase 3 Heritage/TSW2 advertisement livery, which was carried by the real locomotive number 662 from December 2021 to September 2022. This livery has since been officially added to TSW as a free update, but this begs the question as to why developers, not just DTG, still do gameplay packs these days. In numerous cases, what's on offer is little more than a reskin, or multiple reskins, that could easily be made by players and downloaded for free from the Creators Club. Case in point, Amtrak's Centro/Regional Railways reskin for the Class 323. Way to make a good first impression. Not helping the situation is the fact that most of these gameplay packs are far too expensive for what you get, and one of the biggest rip-offs in recent memory is the Flixtrain Vectron. On the plus side, and if you time your keyboard inputs right, you can get the Vectron's horn to sound like music. Considering the TSW2 adverts that the real 662 once displayed, I would have thought that DTG and Amtrak were on good terms with each other, and it's disappointing to see that we never got anywhere near a decent amount of Amtrak engines and routes in the game. Not even the iconic P42DC Genesis locomotive with superliner coaches for Cajon Pass. One Amtrak service in particular that I'd like to see in TSW is the Pacific Surfliner, even if we just get the San Diego to Oceanside section, complete with the SC44 Chargers in both coaster and surfliner variants, along with suitable coaches for each variant. But because the Chargers are still not in Train Simulator, I've had to use the F59 PHI for these scenes. Come to think of it, DTG could also make a Sprinter reskin of the BR642 from the Maintalbahn DLC of November 2023 and use it for AI traffic at Oceanside. It would certainly be ideal if the reskin was added as a free update, just like what TrainSim Germany did when they brought out the Deutsche Bahn Red livery for the BR628. As for the MPI F40PH-3C, this is the rebuilt version of MBTA's old F40PH-2C locomotives, originally built by EMD in 1987 and 1988. I worked out which variant this used to be based on the number range seen in-game. It's 1050 to 1075, even including 1073, despite the real thing being scrapped after the Boston Back Bay crash of 1990. Besides the ACS-64 and F40PH-3C, you can also run Amtrak's Acela Express on Boston Sprinter, but this thing is sold separately for $24.79 NZD at full price. The Acela wasn't released in TSW until February 2023, almost 2 years after the Boston Sprinter route itself, but regardless, she helps to make the rail scene just that little bit more realistic. I have no opinion on the Acela add-on because I hardly ever drive this thing. As of the 13th of November 2024, we now have 2 MBTA routes in TrainSim World 5, with the newer addition being the Framingham and Worcester line. This route includes the HSP-46 locomotive with double-decker BTC-5 coaches and CTC-5 cab cars, which means that we can finally see mixed MBTA trains in the game. But for some reason, the newer stock from the Framingham and Worcester line didn't initially layer onto Boston Sprinter, and Dovetail have since announced that you'll need to pay for a gameplay pack if you want the HSP-46 on Boston Sprinter, without using mods. Now I don't know about you, but to me, that idea makes about as much sense as Tony Basil singing about moving to outer space with a dog for company. And before anyone tries the tiresome, "if you don't like it, don't buy it" line, don't give me that crap. We already know that we're not obliged to buy the DLC, but that doesn't mean we must shut up and stop criticizing. That is not how this works. Anyway, the problem is that DTG will be wanting people to pay for what is essentially nothing more than a timetable mode layer, which is absolute lunacy, especially since there's already a mod that enables the HSP-46 and double-decker coaches to substitute into the Boston Sprinter timetable. Link in the description. The default timetable mode on Boston Sprinter only includes 24 playable services for the ACS64, 78 services with the F40PH-3C leading, 78 with the CTC3 cab car leading, and 20 services for the Acela. With the addition of several AI-only/off-map MBTA services, it makes for a fairly busy rail scene in the Boston South area, but the service pattern is incredibly spartan south of Boston Back Bay, and for the rest of the journey to Providence or Stoughton, the route feels like a ghost town, without referencing that song by the Specials. The in-game timetable is quite inconsistent for the MBTA services, especially once you get out of Boston. Surely, in real life, you wouldn't have to wait up to 4 hours past 3:20 PM for a southbound train at Canton Junction. Other times, the trains are only around 60 or 30 minutes apart. I'm no expert on the MBTA schedule, but surely the headways for the Providence line are not this inconsistent in real life. The route coverage on Boston Sprinter is way too short for motive power as fast as the ACS64 and Acela, which have top speeds of 125 and 150 miles per hour respectively. The Amtrak trains only call at 4 stations on this short section, namely Providence, Route 128, Boston Back Bay, and Boston South, and it only takes between 39 and 43 minutes to cover the whole section in an Amtrak locomotive. The situation with the Amtrak stock on Boston Sprinter is similar to the Class 390 on WCML London Euston to Milton Keynes, another route where the coverage is too short for the fast train, so she feels like a caged animal, in a sense. One service that I've always liked operating in this game is the run from Boston South to Stoughton, despite the mediocre sound quality on the F40PH-3C. I like this run because A, it's not too long, B, it's a complete end-to-end service, and C, there's quite a contrast between the big city of Boston and the comparatively rural setting of the single-track Stoughton Branch. You used to be able to get the F40PH-3C up to 100 miles per hour on the southbound run between Ruggles and Route 128. But the speed limit on that section has now been wrangled back to a more realistic 80 miles per hour. It had always been limited to 80 for northbound services when the cab car was leading. This begs the question as to why the speed limit for southbound services, with the locomotive leading, was initially set to 100 miles per hour in the first place. Thinking back to the audio, I swear the prime mover sound on the MBTA locomotive is reused from the Caltrain F40PH-2 Cat that Dovetail made in 2019, as part of the now discontinued San Francisco to San Jose route. While the horn on the MBTA locomotive was not reused from the Caltrain one, it is, in my opinion, still a poor imitation of the Nathan K5LAs used on the real locomotives. As for the horn on the CTC3 cab car, that isn't much better. I think the real things have, or at least had, Nathan K3L horns, but don't quote me on that. To be fair, at least Dovetail's rendition of the MBTA F40PH-3C is not just a reskin of the existing Caltrain F40. There are numerous detailed differences between the two variants, as indicated just from this head-on shot. Although, in both cases, I can't help thinking that the nose looks a little too small. Perhaps the most notable difference is at the other end, where we see that the Caltrain locomotive doesn't have a rear walking platform. That's because the body shell was extended to accommodate a separate head-end power generator, so the locomotive doesn't need to sound like she's screaming away at full power the whole time. Speaking of screamers, I wouldn't mind seeing at least one of the following F40PH variants in TSW. The Altamont Corridor Express F40PH-3C, Metra F40PHM-2 and F40PH-3, Coaster F40PHM-2C, Via Rail F40PH-2D, New Jersey Transit F40PH-2 CAT, or even the Amtrak non-powered control units. I'd also like to see the Tri-Rail F40PHL-2 in the game, even though she's not a real F40. Instead, she was a strange rebuild using parts from old Conrail GP40s and Burlington Northern F45s. If we ever did get a route out of Miami in TSW, I wouldn't be surprised if DTG cut the route coverage at Fort Lauderdale, instead of going all the way to West Palm Beach. For the longest time, I've never really bothered to look closely at the scenery on the Boston to Providence route, because I was too focused on driving the locomotives. But I did notice a few things during this video's production, including the poor line-side details in multiple places between Canton Junction and Providence. For some reason, the 8-car stop marker on the northbound platform at Hyde Park is placed too far away from the track, to the point where it phases through the ramp that leads up to River Street. Another thing I noticed was this bit of floating track just north of Canton Junction. Why this still hasn't been fixed is anyone's guess. The passenger information screens throughout Boston Sprinter are all completely inaccurate. This is the same design that Dovetail used on the original Long Island Railroad, Peninsula Corridor, and CN Oakville subdivision routes. They would go on to reuse this design again on the Harlem Line and New York to Trenton. Meanwhile, the Framingham and Worcester route uses newer, and better-looking, PIS screens, but these are apparently reused from the extended Long Island Railroad, and I'd be surprised if they'll ever be added to Boston Sprinter as well. From what I gather, these high-level sections of the platforms at most MBTA stations are for wheelchair users to have level boarding. Why the entire platform isn't high-level, like it is at the 4 Amtrak-served stations, is beyond me. Curiously, some of them, like the ones at Hyde Park, don't have any ramps in-game, only steps instead. How is anyone in a wheelchair supposed to safely disembark in this situation? Come to think of it, we still don't have any wheelchair-bound NPCs in TSW. Go figure. This one at Canton Junction is especially ridiculous, because a fence goes all the way along and the steps are on the wrong side. Upon closer inspection, I realised that this asset has just been copied and pasted over from the northbound platform. Go figure. Meanwhile, at Sharon, the next station down the line, the elevated platform sections don't look nearly as dumb, but on the southbound side, there's a very large step from the ramp to the ground. I don't think it should look like this. You'll run past at least 2 freight yards on the Boston to Providence route, with one of them being just south of Reedville Station, and there's also some sidings along the Stoughton Branch. If you own the Sandpatch grade route, you will see the CSX freight wagons and EMD GP38-2 locomotives parked in those yards, but you can't do anything with them as there are no freight services in timetable mode. This is due to the GP38-2 model not having cab signals, and it's pretty annoying to see that, all these years later, DTG still hasn't bothered to update this model to make it compatible with the Northeast Corridor. Even though I prefer passenger over freight trains, any amount of service variation is still better than none. The barriers for the level crossing at Canton Centre have a problem where, despite being activated as normal for Stoughton-bound trains, they will go back up as the train stops in the station, and they will stay up as said train goes through the crossing. I've seen a similar issue at multiple crossings on the San Bernardino line. At the end of the day, I wouldn't go so far as to say that Boston Sprinter is absolutely terrible, but it's still not as good as I used to think it was, having been let down by the short route coverage, weak scenery, spartan timetable, and poor MBTA rolling stock offering. If I could make any suggestions for ways that DTG could improve the route, they would be to A. add cab signals to the GP38-2 so we could finally run freight services on the NEC, B. completely overhaul the scenery, C. add the full Needham line branching off from Forest Hills, and D. extend the main route coverage to New Haven, Connecticut, or, at the very least, MBTA's Wickford Junction station. But considering DTG's poor treatment of the US content as of late, I doubt any of those ideas will ever happen. For the time being, I think Boston to Providence deserves nothing more than a 6 out of 10. This is certainly one of the American train sim world routes of all time, and as for what I'll look at in the next TSW review, it'll likely be the main Spessartbahn. That review will be ready when it's ready, since I don't like to rush these projects. That's something Dovetail and Rivers would do.